Solo Leveling by Chu Gong. Chapter 66. The King's Fury. Had there ever been a time when the entire world cheered with one voice? When Jinwu reappeared and stabbed the Frost Monarch in the chest, everyone pumped their fists and screamed with joy. Hoo-ha! It was the best gift they could have asked for after the despair of witnessing the death of the most powerful hunter in human history at the hands of monsters. People passionately called out his name. Some were in tears, while others tried to comfort them. And every one of them watched as the Asian hunter killed the monster that had threatened the whole human race. When national-level hunter Thomas Andre fell and top hunter Leonard Nairman stepped up to help, the monsters had stopped being just South Korea's problem. It became about the survival of all humankind. The horrifying memory of Kamish, the dragon-devouring city, after city in the United States, was still fresh in their minds. No one wanted to see a tragedy like that happen again. Viewers across the US, Germany, and around the world lost their minds over Jinwu's victory. It was as if they were trying to wash away the defeat and fright that had overcome them when they saw the greatest hunters fall. Yay! The cheers continued each time Jinwu attacked the Frost Monarch until finally the tenacious monster fell, his ashes scattering in the wind to a deafening roar. Whoa! The triumphant cries of the people echoed throughout different cities. Even news anchors currently on air joined in the celebrations. We've just received word that Thomas Andre, who appeared to sustain severe injuries, is currently in stable condition. Ambulances have arrived on the scene and are transferring the injured to a nearby hospital. The monster that slaughtered citizens has stopped moving. It is now nothing but ashes. Confirmations that the fight was over continued to pour in, and the people's excitement could not be stopped. Jin Woo-sung! Jin Woo-sung! Jin Woo-sung! But the most elated person in the world was most likely Jinchul Wu, president of the Hunters Association. His eyes remained fixed on the TV screen while his subordinates cheered and hugged one another. He spotted something that made him raise an eyebrow. Wait. With a shaky hand, Jinchul urgently pulled out his cell to play a video he had saved. He had replayed the surveillance camera footage of President Go being murdered in this very office so many times. He pressed play. The man in the video. It wasn't easy to make him out because he appeared for only a moment and the video was blurry, but the man resembled the monster Jinwu had defeated a moment ago. In addition, the speed with which the icy ground melted away was the same. That means it finally hit Jinchul exactly who Jinwu had been up against, President Go's killer. When he recalled his conversation with Jinwu after learning of President Go's death, chills spread across his body. Thank you for being with President Go at the end. I'm going to kill him with my own hands. Huh? I'm going to kill the magic beast who took President Go's life, whatever it takes. So please save your thanks for later. Jinwu had made good on his promise. The tip of Jinchul's nose grew red, and his eyes filled with tears as he watched the TV. The camera zoomed in on Jinwu's face. Jinchul felt like he could somewhat sympathize with Jinwu's rather tired expression. Jinchul's heart felt like it was about to overflow with emotion. President Go could finally rest in peace. As memories of the mentor he admired came to mind, he looked at Jinwu with gratitude. Thank you, Hunter Sung. The human form of the Frost Monarch slowly disintegrated into dust. Jinwu had avenged the late President Go as well as himself. He glared at the vanishing Frost Monarch and turned around. The marshals had been waiting from a distance for Jinwu to finish punishing the Frost Monarch, and they now approached their master. Igris kept his respectful and calm demeanor even after getting his full power back. On the other hand, Baru expressed with everything he had how happy he was to see his master again. My king! Baru's eyes were wet with unshed tears. Jinwoo patted him on the shoulder and looked around. The other man. He could no longer see the man in the ragged robe. Who was that man earlier? Igris answered instead of the emotional Baru. He was determined to protect you with all his might while you were unconscious. Jinwoo was slightly shocked to hear Igris's rumbling voice speaking for the first time, but the novelty of it quickly passed. He raised an eyebrow. He protected me? Yes, sire. Unlike Baru, Igris spoke the language of magic beasts, since he wasn't used to speaking human languages. Jinwoo had no problem communicating with him. Why had the man protected him? Jinwoo had never met him before. As he continued discussing things with Igris, Jinwoo spotted something on the floor. This is... Jinwoo picked up the object, and his eyes widened imperceptibly. The man in the robe walked behind a building that was half demolished and took off his hood. His hair was messy, and his beard was unkempt. Ilwan's son leaned on the wall to catch his breath. Ha ha! He raised his left hand, which he'd lost all feeling in. Sure enough, it had gone gray, and the fingertips were slowly turning to ash. It was the consequences of using a higher being's power in a human body. But despite his extreme pain, Ilwan looked pleased with himself. I did it! He'd been able to use that power to protect his son. And now that Jinwoo had taken on the mantle of the Shadow Monarch, he would be a great help to humankind. It was all worth it in the end. He looked away from his disintegrating hand, let his head hit the wall, and closed his eyes. The rulers had loaned their power to Ilwan and asked him to stop the Shadow Monarch. Not that he had a choice when he had been stuck in the gap between dimensions after the gate closed. He returned to Earth as an avatar of the rulers with a very important mission. However, he was unable to fulfill his duty. How could a parent kill their own child even if that child housed the worst disaster of humankind? Ilwan could do nothing but observe Jinwoo from a distance. While he was putting off his mission, the ruler's objective changed, and the brightest fragment of luminosity gave Ilwan a new order. Protect the Shadow Monarch. The rulers had realized that they needed the Shadow Monarch at full power to stop the other monarchs' plans. The Dragon King and his army of destruction would arrive here before the soldiers of the sky, and the only one strong enough to stop him was the Shadow Monarch. The rulers were not sure whether the Shadow Monarch would side with the humans, so it was a big gamble on their part. The answer was now clear. Jinwoo had chosen to stay with the humans, and his decision aligned with that of the Shadow Monarch. The Shadow Monarch had been reborn as Jinwoo himself. It had been worth it to protect Jinwoo at the risk of his own life. Ilwan regretted that he had to leave like this without saying goodbye to his son, whom he hadn't seen in 10 years. But no one had the right to take a parent away from a child twice, even the parent themselves. It would be better for Jinwoo if Ilwan just disappeared quietly. Ilwan comforted himself with this thought as he watched his body turn to ash. Just then, he felt a familiar presence nearby. Using his right hand, which was still functional, Ilwan quickly put his hood back over his head and stood up. Someone was standing in front of him, and Ilwan knew exactly who it was without having to check. It was Jinwoo. Ilwan walked past the son he desperately wanted to call out to. Jinwoo turned toward him. Did you think I wouldn't know who you are if you covered your face? Ilwan stopped dead in his tracks. How? As Ilwan turned back to face his son, Jinwoo tossed something at him. Ilwan caught the object, which turned out to be the dagger he had dropped as his left hand went numb. Ilwan looked up from the weapon to his son's resentful gaze. Jinwoo could recall his father's daggers from his childhood. He remembered getting in trouble for playing with those daggers when he was younger. It suddenly hit Jinwoo why daggers were his weapon of choice as opposed to the Shadow Monarch, who typically wielded a sword on the battlefield. It was because of the memories of his father. The system had been affected by parts of Jinwoo's memories and continuously provided daggers for him. "Were you planning to leave without a word again, Dad?" Jinwoo asked in a low voice. "Dad." Ilwon removed his hood as the word burrowed into his chest. His right hand was also gradually turning to ash now. Jinwoo was startled as he caught sight of his father's hands. "I didn't want you to see me like this," Ilwon said with a wry smile. Jinwoo knew that nothing could be done once someone's body lost its vitality and began to turn to ash. He made to run to his father, but Ilwon raised his right hand to stop him. His left arm had already turned to ash up to his shoulder. Jinwoo unwillingly stopped in his tracks. "Then what about you, Dad? Did you not want to see me?" Ilwon's right hand dropped to his side. "I did want to see you. This whole time." Ilwon was thankful that he had been able to observe Jinwoo from afar, even though Jinwoo couldn't see him. When Jinwoo stepped in front of him, Ilwon touched his face with his remaining hand, and Jinwoo's tears dripped onto it. Despite his absence, Jinwoo had, "You grew up to be so strong. Did the rulers do this to you? Did they abandon you after using you?" There was a burning rage in Jinwoo's voice, but Ilwon shook his head. "They gave me a choice. I chose to protect you, and that was the correct choice." Ilwon's right hand was turning to ash and scattering in the air now. "I'd like to talk to you more, but..." He had wanted more time with his son. What a cruel thing he'd done, forcing his child to erase his father from his heart for a second time. Ilwon couldn't hold back his tears. "I'm so sorry that I wasn't a good father." With those words, Fwyish, having consumed all his energy in the fight against the monarchs, Ilwon's entire body disintegrated. Jinwoo attempted to hug his father, but all that remained was ash. Something shattered in Jinwoo's heart. Unable to hold it in any longer, he let out a roar toward the sky. "Ah!" The mana in the air vibrated. The sky, the air, and the land cried out. A voice like that of the monarchs came out of Jinwoo's mouth. "Mark my words, monarchs." Everything had been because the monarchs had targeted Earth, and Jinwoo was going to make them pay by any means necessary. His mana-infused voice spread throughout the entire world. "I swear to make you pay for what has happened today." The Shadow Monarch's rage shook the heavens and the earth. "Are you listening, monarchs?" That day, a human who had acquired a peculiar power decided on how to use it. That was the day the war truly began. Perhaps it was a good thing that Jinwoo had made his proclamation in the language of the world of chaos. His voice was heard throughout the earth, and most people brushed it off as thunder rumbling in the sky. Opinions differed on why they'd heard the same sound, but discussion didn't last long, since everyone was celebrating Jinwoo's victory. The scene was the same at Ground Zero. Hunters who were nervously awaiting their turn to join the fight cheered when they heard the monster had been killed. The guild masters of the two best guilds in Korea, Jongin Choi and Yunho Baek, breathed out sighs of relief and grinned at each other. "President Baek, you didn't look so good earlier. You feeling better now? Wipe the sweat off your forehead before you speak, President Choi. Surely it's not heart palpitations, right? I've got an herbal remedy that can help you. My goodness, look at all that sweat. Here, please take my handkerchief." The two engaged in a bout of banter, but they were able to make fun of each other only because the crisis had been averted. They'd barely been able to breathe properly due to anxiety just a few minutes ago. After all, a national-level hunter had been tossed around like a rag doll. That put not only the two guild masters' lives in danger, but the lives of their guild members as well. Every single hunter who had gathered there was keenly aware that if not for Jin Woo, they would have lost their lives. The two guild masters were now relieving some of the pressure that had been weighing them down by poking fun at each other. In between jibes, Yunho's gaze fixed on something over Zhongyan's shoulder. "Oh!" Zhongyan followed Yunho's gaze to see a man was emerging from the ruins of the downtown area. Jin Woo was silently making his way toward them. The cheering and excitement died down as the other hunters also spotted Jin Woo. The only sounds they could hear were the ambulance sirens echoing in the distance. "It's Hunter Jin Woo-sung. That's the man who..." Although the battle was over, Jin Woo's aura still overwhelmed the entire area. Seeing Jin Woo like that rendered everyone speechless. Steam rose from his shoulders, a sign that he had just fought an epic battle. When their eyes met, President Beck respectfully bowed his head at Jin Woo. And that was the start. One by one, the other hunters also bowed to Jin Woo as a salute to a soldier returning from the battlefield. It was a sign of respect and admiration to the hunter who had fought so spectacularly. Jin Woo took in the sight. He then walked past the hunters, who cleared a path for him, and approached a familiar-looking van parked nearby. Thomas was about to board an ambulance with Leonard by his side, when they spotted Jin Woo from behind. Leonard looked concerned. "Hunter Sung doesn't look happy." Thomas was in a much better state after emergency treatment from some healers. He nodded in agreement. "You're right. Why do you think that is? He defeated such powerful monsters." Hunters understood one another best. They understood the unexplainable exhilaration of breathing fresh air after clearing a high-level dungeon. So why did Jin Woo look so glum? Thomas had a theory. "Hunter Sung probably didn't like how he fought against those creatures." Leonard hadn't expected that. Jin Woo had displayed superhuman abilities, but he was upset by the way he had fought? Did that even make sense? Thomas continued, as if he'd read Leonard's mind. "It's hard for me to believe as well. But he was probably disappointed by a few missteps he made during the battle." "Oh, that," Leonard hissed as he remembered the moment the beast's claws penetrated Jin Woo's chest. Leonard had also felt like his world was collapsing when the ancient ice elf stabbed Jin Woo. But those things had happened because the enemies were too powerful, right? How many people in this world could stand up to just one of them, much less both? Leonard shook his head at that thought. No. Only an ordinary hunter like Leonard would think that getting hurt was inevitable. But victory was assured for someone on Jin Woo's level. The question would be how? Chills ran up Leonard's spine as he considered that. Thomas concluded, "Hunter Jin Woo-sung is one scary man." "I agree." During the ride to the hospital, Thomas nodded to himself. I was right not to raise a fuss in his guild office that day. On his end, Leonard resolved to never get on Jin Woo's bad side. Skreek. Bungo, also known as the Ajin Guild's van, came to a stop, and a young man got out of the driver's side. Jinho had rushed to the site immediately, as soon as he saw Jin Woo being brutally attacked. Although he didn't possess the perception of a high-rank hunter, he was able to track down Jin Woo in the crowd of hunters immediately. Jinho ran toward him with tears in his eyes. "Bosses!" The anger in Jin Woo's eyes waned a bit when he saw Jinho running toward him. Jinho tackled him in a hug, and though Jin Woo would normally dodge it, he stayed put and accepted the hug. Today was different. As Jinho clung to him and bawled, Jin Woo gently patted him on the back. Knowing that someone was so genuinely concerned about him slowly melted Jin Woo's frozen heart. Maybe Jin Woo did need some consolation. Jin Woo cracked a small smile as Jinho managed to calm himself enough to lift his snotty, teary face off Jin Woo's chest. "Are you okay, boss?" "No, I'm not." "What?" Jinho's eyes widened in surprise at the unexpected answer. In response, Jinwoo pointed at his snot and tear-stained shirt. "Oh!" Jinho hurriedly wiped his eyes and his nose with his sleeve and hung his head. "I'm sorry, boss. It's just that I was so happy that you were okay." Jinwoo chuckled. Jinho had always been a little eccentric, but he'd also always been quick to clue in on what Jinwoo needed. Jinho's face brightened. "Boss, I went ahead and brought you a change of clothes." "Clothes?" Jinwoo looked down at himself. He was a complete mess after his battle with the monarchs. "If you show up at home like this, your mother will get worried again, won't she? So I brought you some fresh clothes." Well. Jinho beamed as Jinwoo looked at him proudly. "Let's go, boss. I'll drive you home." Jinwoo nodded. Mom and Gina probably saw it all on TV, so first things first. I should go and reassure them that I'm okay. As Jinho got in the driver's seat, Jinwoo looked back at the downtown area. Many people had rushed to the location to help and were getting the job done. Jinwoo had gained a thing or two in this battle. The biggest priority is finding a communication device that I can use in that forest. He couldn't make the same mistake twice. But the biggest thing he'd gained were the daggers his father had left behind. He could still feel his father's warmth coming from the handles. "Dad?" When Jinwoo made no move to leave, Jinho cautiously called to him. "Boss?" Jinwoo gently kissed the hilt of each dagger before storing them in his inventory. He then slid into the passenger seat. "Let's go!" "Yes, boss." With that, the long day finally came to an end. The Hunters Association of Korea eventually announced that the monsters that had appeared in Seoul were unidentified magic beasts. The destruction had been catastrophic. Many people had been injured or killed, and innumerable vehicles and buildings had been damaged beyond repair. However, all was not lost. Perhaps this could be considered a blessing in disguise, but people had learned how to respond to a crisis. Additionally, the impressive strength Jinwoo had displayed promptly changed the mindset of people around the world. This change motivated action, even from the most unexpected places. That evening, Jinchul visited the Blue House to discuss how to handle the aftermath of the magic beasts as well as the monolithic gate over Seoul. Considering the importance of these matters, the president of South Korea welcomed him. They exchanged brief greetings before getting down to business. "Shouldn't you relocate outside Seoul?" asked Jinchul. President Kim hesitated, then sighed. "I apologize for my rude behavior during our last meeting, but please don't think I have neglected my duties as the president of this country." His expression was that of someone who was fearful, but trying to push past it. "What would the people of Korea think if I ran away without a word? I do not want to go down in history as a failure." President Kim had long since given Jinchul the impression that he was a typical politician scrambling to get more votes, so Jinchul snorted at the unexpected explanation. The president might have considered his reaction rude, but he let it slide as he, too, had said regrettable things in the past. "I see." Jinchul took out some documents he had prepared for presentation. Before he could start, a government employee rushed in and whispered something to the president. "What? Is this true?" President Kim jumped out of his seat in disbelief. The employee nodded with a serious expression. "It's true, Mr. President." "What would you like to do, sir?" "Put the call through. I'll talk to them." They handed President Kim a cell phone, and a voice every South Korean would recognize came through the receiver. "I've been deliberating for quite some time now, and I've decided that it would be beneficial to help the people of South Korea with this matter." It was the voice of the leader of North Korea. President Kim cocked his head. Help us with what? There's a gate above Seoul, no? We will send some of our hunters to help. Let us combine the forces of the North and South and take care of this. North Korea was sending signals. Though the gate was unusually large, there had been little to no offers of cooperation from surrounding countries. After the fight against the monsters, however, their attitudes had changed. South Korea, or rather, Jin Woo-sung, must not fall in battle. That was the conclusion reached by the leaders of the world. A tragedy in South Korea would not end there. If Jin Woo couldn't stop the disaster, would any hunter from any other country be able to? Hunters from both neighboring countries like North Korea, Japan, China, and Russia, and faraway nations such as the United States of America, Germany, England, and France all made their way to Seoul. They had but one goal. We need to help Hunter Sung block the monolithic gate. Thanks to Jin Woo's performance, they believed that South Korea would be their last stand. Hunters from around the world joined the South Korean hunters in Seoul. The Hunters Association of Korea eventually announced that the monsters that had appeared in Seoul were unidentified magic beasts. The destruction had been catastrophic. Many people had been injured or killed, and innumerable vehicles and buildings had been damaged beyond repair. However, all was not lost. Perhaps this could be considered a blessing in disguise, but people had learned how to respond to a crisis. Additionally, the impressive strength Jin Woo had displayed promptly changed the mindset of people around the world. This change motivated action, even from the most unexpected places. That evening, Jinchul visited the Blue House to discuss how to handle the aftermath of the magic beasts as well as the monolithic gate over Seoul. Considering the importance of these matters, the president of South Korea welcomed him. They exchanged brief greetings before getting down to business. "Shouldn't you relocate outside Seoul?" asked Jinchul. President Kim hesitated, then sighed. "I apologize for my rude behavior during our last meeting. But please don't think I have neglected my duties as the president of this country." His expression was that of someone who was fearful, but trying to push past it. "What would the people of Korea think if I ran away without a word? I do not want to go down in history as a failure." President Kim had long since given Jinchul the impression that he was a typical politician scrambling to get more votes, so Jinchul snorted at the unexpected explanation. The president might have considered his reaction rude, but he let it slide as he, too, had said regrettable things in the past. "I see." Jinchul took out some documents he had prepared for presentation. Before he could start, a government employee rushed in and whispered something to the president. "What? Is this true?" President Kim jumped out of his seat in disbelief. The employee nodded with a serious expression. "It's true, Mr. President. What would you like to do, sir?" "Put the call through. I'll talk to them." They handed President Kim a cell phone, and a voice every South Korean would recognize came through the receiver. "I've been deliberating for quite some time now, and I've decided that it would be beneficial to help the people of South Korea with this matter." It was the voice of the leader of North Korea. President Kim cocked his head. "Help us with what? There's a gate above Seoul, no? We will send some of our hunters to help. Let us combine the forces of the North and South and take care of this." North Korea was sending signals. Though the gate was unusually large, there had been little to no offers of cooperation from surrounding countries. After the fight against the monsters, however, their attitudes had changed. South Korea, or rather, Jin Woo-sung, must not fall in battle. That was the conclusion reached by the leaders of the world. A tragedy in South Korea would not end there. If Jin Woo couldn't stop the disaster, would any hunter from any other country be able to? Hunters from both neighboring countries like North Korea, Japan, China, and Russia, and faraway nations such as the United States of America, Germany, England, and France all made their way to Seoul. They had but one goal. We need to help Hunter Sung block the monolithic gate. Thanks to Jinwoo's performance, they believed that South Korea would be their last stand. Hunters from around the world joined the South Korean hunters in Seoul. It was the day before the projected dungeon break from the monolithic gate. 2 days had passed since the system's deletion. Jinwoo was getting used to his life without the daily quest. Without the limitations of the system, he'd run into plenty of both conveniences and inconveniences. One such inconvenience was the loss of the system's shop. Jinwoo took out a bottle of healing potion from the inventory and stared at it, as if trying to shoot lasers out of his eyes. The items in the shop were originally conjured up by the Shadow Monarch by manipulating mana. Theoretically, Jinwoo should have been able to create the same items at will. He closed his eyes and pictured the healing potion in his mind. As he did, he could sense the mana moving around him. Focus. Focus. However, the mana failed to coalesce and scattered every which way instead. It was a failure. Jinwoo opened his eyes and let out a sigh. Crafting by himself would be difficult to master. I guess I need to practice more. At that moment, his cell phone vibrated. Hunter Sung. It's Jinchul Wu. Yes, President Wu. Jinwoo sat down on the edge of his bed as he answered his phone. President Wu's voice sounded a bit hoarse. He had most likely been working around the clock due to various incidents. Hunter Sung, if it's not too much to ask, could you please stop by the association today? The estimated moment of the dungeon break was imminent, and the association needed some advice from Jinwoo as the one who would play a pivotal role in this raid. Since he didn't have any plans, Jinwoo agreed. I'll see you at the association. Click. Jinwoo was getting ready to leave when Igris piped up. Master. Yeah. Jinwoo still found it a little awkward to hear Igris's uniquely deep tone and deferential way of speaking. There is something I would like to discuss with you. The following day, every TV station in the world interrupted their regularly scheduled programming to report on what was happening in Seoul. Some channels broadcast live footage from Ground Zero and went with a standard news format, while others brought in a panel of experts for commentary. One of the latter was the Hunter Channel, a popular American network. As the program got underway, the footage showed the area packed with hunters. An expert on the panel got emotional as they asked, "Do you know the last time this many hunters from different nations gathered in the same place?" The host laughed. "I'm not sure, but I'm guessing it hasn't been as long as we think, since guilds from different countries sometimes work together." The expert shook his head. "It's been 8 years. 8 years. It's actually closer to 9 years at this point." 8 years. Everyone watching the program immediately recalled the massive magic beast that had terrorized humankind at that time. 8 years? You're talking about the Kamish raid? Yes, exactly. This is the first time since Kamish that more than 5 different nations of hunters have come together like this. Out of the record number of hunters that came to the aid of the United States, all but 5 had perished. Those 5 survivors eventually came to be known as national-level hunters. For the countries that had lost their best hunters, it had been a terrible loss to bear. Since then, countries have been hesitant to involve themselves in the affairs of other nations. That much was to be expected. No nation wanted hunters to lay down their lives for another country. Guilds from different countries sometimes worked together for the guild's benefit, but very rarely did hunters assemble like this for a single country's sake. So, Professor, you mean to say that South Korea's Hunter Sung brought hunters together again after Kamish tore them apart? That's correct. The professor took a breath in order to continue his lengthy explanation. It all began with Hunter Sung resolving the dungeon break in Japan. Prior to then, Japan had mobilized to help Korea with Jeju Island. But the result of that had been a bust. Had the story ended there, public opinion would have been strongly against interfering with another country's affairs. But everything changed when Jinwoo stepped up to defeat the giants invading Japan. Historically, South Korea and Japan didn't have the best relationship. Additionally, Japan had recently tried to cheat Korea as well. Yet a Korean hunter had stepped in to help Japan in spite of everything. It's probably difficult to put into words just how thankful and touched the people of Japan were. When Jinwoo came to Japan's rescue, the unwritten rule of minding your own business and not interfering with another country's problems had been broken. This gave other hunters the confidence to follow Jinwoo's lead. Besides, it became clear when Thomas Andre fell a few days ago. Who, then, could stop those monsters? Hunter Jinwoo Sung himself showed us the answer to that. The question now was tougher to answer. What would they do if Hunter Sung fell? If Hunter Sung falls, then it's all over. There's no one else. He's our last line of defense. Other countries had realized that the moment Jinwoo went down, the monolithic gate in the sky would no longer be Korea's problem alone. After South Korea would be North Korea, then China or Russia, and eventually the rest of the world. The monolithic gate had become the common enemy of the entire world, and a single hunter from Asia had been the one to open everyone's eyes. Just as the expert was about to elaborate on how this affair would need to be safely dealt with in order to cement this notion in people's minds. "Oh, look!" The host jumped out of his seat after a producer gestured to him urgently. All the experts on the panel turned to a monitor. The live feed showed the extremely large gate opening like a gaping maw. "Oh my God!" Everyone in the studio was rendered speechless at the unbelievable sight. The air itself seemed to be vibrating as tens of thousands of hunters surrounded the area under the gate and anticipated the dungeon break with bated breath. The moment they had been waiting for was here. The hunters who specialized in close-quarter combat readied themselves. The hunters who specialized in ranged attacks prepared for a preemptive strike. Arrows containing magic power and magic spells were pointed toward the sky. The tension in the area could be cut with a knife. The hunters kept their eyes on one of two things: the sky and Jinwoo's back. The Korean hunter stood at the forefront, his eyes fixed on the gate above. The dungeon break crept closer with each passing minute. He could sense it coming. Ba-dump, be-a-dump, be-a-dump. The black heart, which now beat in place of his destroyed human heart, pounded in his chest. The other hunters' hearts were racing out of apprehension, but Jin was raced for an entirely different reason. He tried to keep his cool while he awaited the big moment. Haynes stood next to him and peeked at his expression. "This is the first time I've seen you this nervous." "Really?" Jinwoo grinned at her. She smiled back tenderly, then drew her sword and looked at the gate. She sensed that a life-and-death battle was just around the corner. Soon. But Hayne had been mistaken. Jinwoo placed his hand over his heart and closed his eyes. His heart was beating not out of fear or anxiety but excitement. They're coming! The gate is opening! Finally, the gate began to open. The black layer between the gate and this world disappeared, and the creatures inside were unleashed. The mass of magic beasts instantly eclipsed the sky. The hunters were aghast at the swarm, which easily numbered more than 100,000. How? How could that many magic beasts come out at once? There's way too many. Gasps and screams of despair rang out. The creatures descended slowly, as if they were using a gravity-altering spell. Attack! Attack! Everyone, attack! In an attempt to cull their enemies' numbers before the creatures could fight back, hunters took the chance to get in the first attack. Magic twinkled on fingertips. Bowstrings were pulled tightly as arrows were aimed at the sky. Tankers raised their shields up to their chins in preparation for the clash. But before anyone could make a move, Jin Woo bellowed to them, "Stop!" The force of the mana behind Jin Woo's command got his meaning across even to those who did not know Korean. It stopped them all dead in their tracks. Why? Why did Hunter Sung stop us? Tens of thousands of incredulous hunters stared at Jin Woo as he repeated himself. "Stand down, everybody!" Jinchul wiped sweat off his brow as he watched from a distance. If they didn't attack now, the enemy would land safely. If that happened, the hunters on the front lines might get in the way of the hunters in the back. They were already outnumbered by the magic beasts. They didn't need the additional concern of trying not to hit one another. A subordinate uneasily approached Jinchul. "President Wu." It was time to make a decision. Logic dictated that Jinchul should give the order to attack, but he decided to trust Jin Woo. "Do not attack! Do not attack!" When even their commander gave the order to halt, the hunters could only stand around in a daze. What in the world are they thinking? They want to fight those magic beasts head-on without dealing some ranged attacks first. Against that many of them? Confusion and terror swept across the battlefield as the creatures finally landed. The hunters were about to lose their minds at the sea of black creatures. One of the beasts split from the horde and walked in front of the group. Jin Woo made his way toward him. What was going on? The hunters held their breaths as they watched Jin Woo. They stopped in front of each other. Then the magic beast knelt before Jin Woo. The soldiers behind it followed suit. Thud. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers bowing to Jin Woo was an incredible sight to see. After a short silence, the first magic beast raised its head. "Grand Marshal Bellion and the Shadow Army reporting for duty, sir."